We're gonna climb Carmel today. We're recreating the climb that Elijah took when he had the showdown with the prophets of Baal. Now, Elijah wasn't the only guy to make this climb that day. There were 450 prophets of Baal, 400 prophetesses of Asherah, and then the whole community came. It must have been kind of like a Super Bowl of religion up there on top of Carmel. So we're going to climb it to see what they went through. And don't forget, Elijah made this trip 4 times in one day. I bet he was one wiry little mountain climber, and I hope we can do the same thing. So we're going to see what it's like to climb Carmel. Elijah remains one of the most famous and most revered prophets in all of Israel. He comes upon the Bible's pages suddenly and powerfully. In the midst of the most immoral rule in the northern kingdom's history, Elijah brings a confrontational message to Ahab the king and Jezebel, his wife. You know, this whole thing started over water. And I guess you could say it started over faith. It'd be more accurate according to the Bible story. Elijah walked into the king's throne room and said, "It's not going to rain again until I say it is." You see, the king and the queen Jezebel believed that their gods were in charge of water. And when Elijah walks in and says, "It's not going to rain again until my God says so," well, the fight was on. And that fight wasn't going to be settled until they got to the top of Carmel. In the meantime, well, it's green here. It's lush. They've had a lot of rain this year in Israel. Did you let this place miss one season of rain? The whole area looks like this road. The whole area turns dry as dust. Well, it had been 3.5 years, and Elijah was the most hated and wanted man in all of Israel. They would settle the score on top of this mountain. Elijah challenged the prophets of Baal to a great contest. In front of the entire nation, each side would call on its god. 900 prophets would call on Baal, and 1 man would stand for the one true God. The contest would involve a sacrificed animal, an altar, and plenty of prayer. But there would be no fire unless the God of those praying answered that prayer by bringing fire from heaven. It would be a day when the power of the true God would be unmistakable. You know, before the day was out, Elijah would sacrifice to the Lord one of these. And I don't know if I can talk him, her. Looks like her down here, him up there. I don't know if I can get this cow to go with us up to the top of the mountain. But I tell you, if Elijah was able to capture one of these by himself and slaughter it and quarter it and burn it, he was very strong. You want to go? You want to go to the top of the mountain? Huh? No? Shalom then. Peace. Peace be still. The climb from the Jezreel Valley to the top of Mount Carmel is a tough one. The mountain range juts suddenly out of the plains and tops out at 1,750 feet above sea level. Because it is close to the Mediterranean, the mountain receives an abundance of rain each year. It is the source of several springs. A 3-year drought, however, would have had a devastating impact on Carmel and on the entire nation. A contest on top of that mountain that could produce an end to this drought would have undoubtedly been of great interest to thousands of people. When Elijah got to the top of the mountain, he asked the people who came with him what they stood for. The Bible says very clearly, the first time he asked them if they were for God, they didn't say a word. They had commitment to climb this mountain, but they had no commitment at all for the Lord. By the time the day was over, they were on their faces saying, "Yahweh, He is God. Yahweh, He is God." They had an incredible awakening on top of this mountain. We could have taken a truck.
We could have. I'm only telling you now that we are at the top.
It's like Ahab's chariot. I don't know how long we've been walking. Longer than I imagined. That's where we're headed. Those really big rocks up there, that's the top of Carmel. And that's where That's where we're going today, and several centuries ago, that's where they had one of the most important battles ever for the hearts and the minds of the people of Israel. Unfortunately, before the day was out, even though Elijah won the victory, he was depressed because it sure felt like he lost. The hearts of the people did not change. Let's go see the top. The battle on top of Carmel was spectacular. It should have proved to the entire nation that Elijah's God was the true God. And for a while, the people seemed to turn back to God. Elijah led the crowd down the mountain where he oversaw the executions of the false prophets. Then Elijah climbed Carmel again, where he waited on rain. At the sign of the first cloud, Elijah ran down the mountain for his fourth trip on that single day, and he soon ran far to the south, where he dealt with the worst depression of his life. It would take a direct encounter with God before Elijah would get out of his depression and get back to work. Oh, man, we made it. We made it to the top of Carmel. It took a long time, maybe an hour and a half to walk up here. But that's something I've always wanted to do, to feel the mountain under my feet. Because, you know, Elijah walked this path twice up and twice down in one day. But what a story happened here on top of the mountain. With all the people gathered around, Elijah challenged the prophets of Baal to a battle. They built an altar, and he said, I'll build an altar, you build an altar, you pray to your God, I'll pray to my God. And we'll put the sacrifice there. Remember, it hadn't rained in 3.5 years. What they needed was rain. And he said, we'll ask our gods to call down fire from heaven. And if your God can call down fire from heaven, then we know your God is God. If my God calls down fire from heaven, then we know that my God is God. And all the people said, hey, that's great. That's my translation. It's important to remember that Elijah had asked the people, who do you stand for? And they hadn't said a word. They hadn't said anything at all. And now Elijah says, well, let's just find out. Who is God? You know the story how the prophets of Baal fought all day long. They sang, they chanted, they cut themselves. Elijah taunted them, and they tried harder, and their God was silent. Their God was not a God. And Elijah knew that, and they were being exposed for the fakes that they were. Their God was being exposed for the fake that he was. And finally, at the time of the evening sacrifice, Elijah got ready. He made an altar. The Bible says he took 12 stones. Elijah, remember, was very, very strong. And he took 12 stones representing the 12 tribes of Israel. And he built the altar. And at the time of the evening sacrifice, he took a bull and he slaughtered it. What a man's man he was. Wiry and strong. And just as the Lord had commanded, he put that bull on the altar. He asked for water to be brought, and they covered up that altar. And then at exactly the right time, he prays to God. And God brings down fire from heaven immediately. And the fire burns up not only the sacrifice, not only the water, but also the stones. And all of the people fell on their faces before God. And they shouted, the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God. It was one of the greatest revivals in the entire Bible. You know the sad thing? It lasted about one day. Elijah ran back to the bottom of this mountain. Well, they all went down and they killed the prophets of Baal. And then Elijah comes back up and he waits for the rain cloud. And he sees the rain coming and he runs back down to the valley. That's 4 trips up and down Carmel. And Elijah went into a deep depression. Because the people, their hearts were not turned toward God. I think the lesson of Carmel is pretty plain. Yes, we can ask for the miracle. We all would like to see fire come down from heaven. We all would like to see that majestic moment when God proves himself to be God. But I think what God is looking for is the faith without necessarily the miracle. He wants to know in that first question, when Elijah asked the people, who do you stand for? And they were silent. What God is looking for is for me, for you, to be like Elijah and to be unafraid, to take a stand. And this mountain will stand for all time as a reminder to us that the Lord, he is God. The Lord, he is God.